This video will cover part 1 of chapter 13, Getting a Job with Your Bachelor's Degree. We'll start with what research shows employers say they are looking for in new hires. And these are all very general, and kind of your job as someone seeking employment is to make sure that you address some or even all of these attributes in terms of your actual levels of skill and experience. So there are things like problem solving, working in a team, having a good work ethic, having great communication skills, tech skills, leadership skills, etc., all depending on the nature of the job. Some jobs will require extra emphasis on things like communication skills and leadership skills. Some jobs are heavily oriented toward teamwork and problem solving. So as you're thinking about these preferred skills that employers say they want, try to think about ways to tether those to experiences that you already have, where you've been able to show some of those strengths. Another thing to think about is, what has your bachelor's degree in psychology, neuroscience, or human development given you in terms of psychological literacy and, to be honest, research literacy? How can that be leveraged into making you an advantage as a hire? So your authors talk about psychological literacy as being able to apply what you've learned about psychology, neuroscience, and human development to everyday experiences. That can be pretty quickly leveraged into attributes that can be useful for you in a variety of positions. And you've learned about a lot of those bachelor's level positions already over the course of the semester. Another aspect of psychological literacy is knowing how to find information. Throughout your college career, you'll be exposed to opportunities to use technology to find information, to make assessments about that information, evaluating it to determine whether it is appropriate, whether it's valid, especially in an environment where artificial intelligence is becoming ubiquitous. You have to be the one who sits back and says, is what AI is telling me actually accurate? So that's a skill that's going to be sought after going forward, especially as businesses try to use AI as an efficiency tool as well as a problem-solving tool. You still need those human eyes that have been taught. You need those human brains that have learned how to critically evaluate information and decide whether or not it is valid and applicable to the situation you're in. As a science field, or fields, plural, you've learned how to say, here's a research question, here's how we answer this question about human thinking, emotion, and behavior. You can take those skills, those basic research skills, and apply them in lots and lots of different contexts in some of these bachelor's level positions. So make sure that you highlight those skills. Another part of being psychologically literate is having a certain degree of interpersonal skills, solid communication skills, as well as awareness of cultural, racial, class, and ethnic diversity issues. Another aspect of psychological literacy is the ability to be self-reflective, to be able to understand your own behavior, to make inferences about why you've done what you've done, and also to show that you're capable of managing your own behavior using those strong executive functioning skills to get tasks done. And finally, the ability to sustain motivation and get hard things done. When I teach senior research, it's a 2-course capstone kind of experience. I emphasize to students, it's really, especially the ones who say, I just want a job helping people. I'd never want to do research. I hate research. I especially hate data analysis. Well, even if you never do research or data analysis again in the future, one thing you're going to learn, along with being able to work on a team and use those interpersonal skills, because that's required in senior research, you're also going to learn how to push through doing hard things that you don't particularly like. And that's a big way of communicating to a potential employer that you have what it takes to do a job, that no job is going to contain 100% things you love doing. It's just not realistic. It's not rational. So showing that you have the capacity to work toward long-term goals, tolerate stress, is going to be really important. So where do you look for jobs now that you have your bachelor's degree, or when you do have it? One obvious source of information is the Career Center at your university. You can also use online tools. I would recommend using at least 2 or 3 of these online tools. Some of them are better in some domains than others. The 2 that I use the most often when I sit down with students to think about what's available in their areas are Indeed and LinkedIn. I know that many students are encouraged while they're still in high school to develop a LinkedIn profile. The LinkedIn profile is sort of a place where people can post information about who they are, what kind of work they do, what kind of work they're looking for, and so on. In my personal experience using the job search features in LinkedIn, it can be a little clunky and difficult to find exactly what you're looking for. That's why I tend to back it up with looking at Indeed as well, which tends to do a little bit better at identifying local positions that are open in your area. There are also, for every sort of career path, it's possible that there are very hyper-specific job boards. For example, one of my kids is going to be seeking a career in animation. There are very, very specific animation job boards. And in some cases, in that industry, they're only going to post jobs there. And you may or may not see them showing up on general job boards like Indeed or LinkedIn. So this is another one of those situations where you need to do your homework and really think about the type of position you're looking for. You also should use your network. Part of what we try to encourage students to do in our majors is to develop some networks of contacts that you can use in the future, whether you're planning on going into grad school or going straight into the job market. You have connections that you've made in school. These can be your peers who are also, looking for positions and doing things like that. But also, these informal connections. You may have family members, friends, parents of friends who are working in spaces that you're interested in. It's not a waste of your time. It's very useful to sort of invest in those connections, asking questions, talking about their experiences, and so on. That can be really helpful, especially if you make some of those insider connections. They may be able to give you more information about the types of jobs that are coming down the line and who they're seeking for those types of positions. So you should be tapping into these sorts of personal relationships as well as professional relationships that you may have cultivated through work experience and through internships. You've also, if you've completed an internship or if you're planning to, make sure that you're investing, you're making your best effort in those contexts. One really important thing to remember, if you take your internship seriously, it can turn into job offers, or at the very least, really solid letters of recommendation showing that you have worked to your potential in that space. If, however, you treat an internship like a hoop that you have to jump through, you don't put a lot of effort into it, maybe you have some absenteeism, then you're not going to be able to use that as a stepping stone in your future career. So keep that in mind. Even if the organization where you interned isn't specifically hiring, your supervisor, whoever you worked with in that internship, may have good advice for you in terms of where to look. and they may even have contacts in those spaces. So the first step in, after, well, it's not actually the first step is investigating and knowing what you want. The next step is actually completing job applications. Many employers want you to fill out, at the very, very least, a simple application form. Sometimes these are even online. Some of the big job boards like Indeed, there are employers who post there who have sort of automatic application form filling. Even with that, though, you're likely to have to invest more time creating a cover letter, making sure that you have your resume in order as a part of that application process. Make sure that you are careful when you complete your application forms, because in big corporations, they're going to have, in a lot of cases, AI is going to screen the applications as they come through first, looking for certain kinds of information to kind of cull out people that they're absolutely not interested in. As unfortunate as that is, because basically a machine is deciding whether you've made the first cut, there are ways that you can learn to maximize your application so that your individuality will stand out. In addition to making sure that your experience with the details, the dates, is present, your job application is going to tell you something, going to communicate to potential employers something about how hard you're willing to work. Like if you give less detail, less complete information, if there are errors in your information, or if the form is incomplete, that's going to say negative things about you. So make sure that you are completing application forms as completely as you possibly can. Also, in the age of using no capitalization or punctuation in text messages, it's easy for us to get in the habit of just not worrying about neatness and grammar. In the job application process, if you do not use appropriate grammar and spelling and punctuation, you are likely to go down the list of potential candidates. And I have overheard students sometimes complain, well, that's just old people who can't adjust to the times. That may or may not be true, but it's not an excuse. If you want to get a job, you need to move your behavior in the direction of what is expected of the job. You should not assume that the job will bend to you. Many applications don't explicitly tell you to add a resume. The recommendation, though, is that you include it regardless. Even with the online application forms, you should be able to attach files. So what I recommend that my students do is they include both a cover letter and a resume, even if the job application instructions do not tell applicants to do so. It's one of those hidden requirements. Sometimes when companies put their job listings out, they simply say fill out the application. One of the tricks is, okay, they'll tell who's serious about the job and isn't just using a machine to replicate applications and turn them in, by looking for those cover letters that are personalized and carefully drafted, and looking for resumes that are complete and clear and relevant to the job. Many job applications are going to include a request for you to provide references. References are people, and your references should be very specific to the qualifications and abilities outlined in the job that you're seeking. The people you ask to be your references should be able to talk about your abilities and characteristics as they are predictive of job performance. So they're going to be commenting on things like how dependable you are, how resourceful you are, how what your level of motivation has been, your attention to detail, etc. As a college student, you can tap into some of those professors, people you've worked in their labs in research. If you've had an on-campus job, people who were your managers or supervisors, people, if you've had internships or practica, your supervisors in those contexts. And if you're working an outside job while you're in school, if it's relevant, those supervisors can also be good references for you. I want to emphasize this next bullet point. Ask people before you put them on your resume as a reference. And this is for anyone you're going to include as a reference. Professors, I know for sure, because this has happened to me, where I'll get a cold call out of the blue from someone who says student XYZ has put you down as a reference. And I'll come back and say, I was unaware of that. Can you tell me something about the job? Well, that doesn't look good for the applicant. It makes the applicant look like they are manufacturing references, to be blunt about it. So you have to ask people first. And when you ask them, make sure that you give them your resume, tell them what job you're applying for and why you want to apply for it. You also, and this is delicate, and it takes a certain degree of confidence on your part as a student. You need to ask your references if they feel confident they can give you a helpful recommendation. I've been in this situation where I've had students who have not been 100% reliable in the classroom. I've even had students who committed honor code violations who then come to me and expect me to write them a letter of recommendation. On occasion, I've had to say to them, I'm not sure that you want me to write the letter. Do you remember what happened in this class when you had difficulties? And that's a really hard conversation to have. So make sure that people you're choosing are people who have had good work-related experiences with you and can give you a positive recommendation. As I mentioned before, make sure you give your references a copy of your resume and ask them if there's any other pieces of information that they would find helpful as you're applying for jobs. Building your resume is, if you don't have one already, and a lot of students, when they're in high school, they're asked to sort of build this very thin resume. And even as college students, especially early in your college career, you may have very, very little that you feel like you can put on there. Ultimately, a resume is going to be a summary of your educational background, your work experience, and what you want to do. In other words, your career objectives. That resume, how it's structured, how it's written, is one of the few nuggets of information a potential employer gets to look at. It's a way for you to represent what you consider to be your strengths, to show that you have good communication skills, that you have other valuable skills that would be an asset to the organization. More important than that broad idea of asset to the organization is that the skills you have are directly tied or strongly indirectly tied to the actual requirements of the job. Most employers, potential employers, and this is based on research, are not going to spend very much time on a resume. They're going to spend, on average, around 20 seconds looking at your resume. So you need to pack the most bang for your buck into that short resume as you can. What you're going to include in your resume, and your textbook provides you with several kinds of specific information to build on, but basically you're outlining what your skills are, what your abilities are, giving a documentation of your work history. And it doesn't matter whether you worked at Dairy Queen or whatever. Showing that you have been in the workforce is an advantage. that you can put on your resume. Make sure that you are highlighting what your actual strengths are. Try to avoid kind of fuzzy, fluffy strengths, and instead be very specific about what you have a proven ability to do. As you gain more experience, your resume is going to grow and change with you, and you should keep it updated. I try to update my CV at least once a year. Many people who are early in their career lives need to have their resume ready to go, because many times you will be changing jobs, moving from one position to another within an organization or to a new organization. The best resumes tend to focus on skills and experiences in the real world that outside of the educational environment that are useful. Now, even some of the supporting experiences that your authors are talking about here also are some of those outside of the classroom experiences that are directly relevant to the position that you're seeking. So, concrete example, I had an intro student several years ago who his ultimate goal is to be a strength and conditioning coach. He was minoring in psychology, and we had this conversation about, what kind of experiences was he going to put on his resume as he goes out into the job market. And he talked about how he was mentoring with one of the coaches at Mount Union for no money. It wasn't an official position, but he had cultivated a relationship there, and he was actively working to build his skills and build his abilities. He can use that person as a reference. He can also use that experience and highlight those skills on his resume. Information that you need to make sure is included on your resume. You need accurate contact information at the top of your resume. Name, permanent address. You don't want to use your campus mailbox for applications. It's typically seen as too in flux, too impermanent, and it may be perceived as you not quite being ready for the job market. If you live off campus in an apartment or something like that, that can be a permanent address unless you know you're moving out of that space before the job search process concludes. You may want to choose a different permanent address, like your family home, especially if you're going to be moving back there right after graduation and living there for some period of time. Make sure that you include an accurate phone number with an area code. And one thing to say about phones, we've all kind of gotten in the habit of ignoring phone numbers that we don't recognize. When you're searching for a job, you may want to become more aware of when phone calls are coming in. When people don't answer the phone, which I know generationally it's become less and less expected that people will answer the phone. When you're searching for a job, answering the phone is a pretty important thing. You should also include an email address that is valid and appropriate. Like the physical address, your email address, it's generally recommended that you not use your university email because it's seen as impermanent. It's seen as something that, they may or may not be able to get a hold of you. Let's say they hold on to your resume until you graduate in May, and they hold on to it in August. Some universities cancel email accounts as soon as graduation occurs. Others give you much more grace. It's seen as an advantage for you to use an appropriate professional email. Now, many of us have created adorable, sometimes inappropriate email addresses for ourselves on Gmail or whatever. If you have a fun email address that you use for your own personal business, you may want to add a new account just for job searches. and it should be a professional email address. It should be some iteration of your name so that it's easy for the recruiter or the potential person doing the hiring, who it's easy for them to recognize, oh, this is this person and it goes with this resume. So again, if possible, use your name as your email address. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, it's advisable to build one, and make sure that your LinkedIn profile link is in your resume. Another element, usually right after the contact information, is a statement of your objectives. I think your authors mentioned that there's some amount of controversy about the objective statement. Some professionals in this domain recommend leaving out the objective. Others strongly recommend that you include it. It's a sentence. It's one sentence. The goal is to give you that short snapshot period of time to talk about who you are, what you want, what you can do, and what makes you attractive to employers. The tricky thing about writing objective sentences is to make them sound appropriately professional but still personal, so they don't sound generic. The last thing you want to do is to make some platitude statement. Like, don't ask AI to write your objective sentence. It's going to sound like something artificial, because it is. It's just going to sound fluffy and impersonal. These details should be threaded throughout. Like, the things you put in your objective sentence, you are then going to elaborate on those through the remainder of your resume, and you'll touch on those ideas in your cover letter as well. Your objectives should be tailored, so you may have versions of your resume that differ in terms of the stated objective. You should tailor that sentence so that it is a good fit for the job you are actually applying for. One thing that, as a person who's done hiring, if I see an objective sentence that is contrary to the job that is being offered, I'm not going to look at that resume anymore. So you need to be careful that you're matching what you say in your resume to the job that you're applying for. And I'm not saying for you to make things up. Absolutely not, because you'll get caught and that will look very, very bad for you. But you need to be able to show that you care about that job, and you're not just applying for 150,000 jobs all at once and seeing what rises to the surface. They want to know that you're actually interested in them. Being a new college graduate, your resume is going to be kind of thin. So having your objective statement clear, concise, and able to communicate who you are and the skills you've gained as a college student and in your other work experiences can be critically important to getting you an interview. The next thing that you're going to include on your resume is your education and experience. So you can include degrees that you have achieved or that you will receive in the near future. So, let's say that you're a junior in college right now. You can give the name of the university where you're studying and anticipated graduation, giving the month and the year. If your GPA is 3.0 or higher, it's recommended that you include it, listing any academic honors you have received. You can highlight relevant coursework. Like, I've known students who were moving into business-related positions where they were involved in, data analysis and presentation, highlighting the fact that you have actually done that kind of work in courses that you have taken can be an advantage. Now, people differ in opinion as to where to highlight that kind of information and how to do it. I typically don't see, the education and experience section of a resume is typically, I went to school here from this year to this year and I earned this degree. I went to school here, I earned this degree from this time period to this time period. Now, some people will add in there specific job-related experiences. Like, for example, one of my kids on their very thin resume, when they were in college, they had gotten a certification in using Adobe software, and they were looking for a position where using Adobe software was required. So they would put their high school, the years, the degree they got, and then a bullet point under that, received Adobe certification on this date. So you can see how that may play in your favor. In terms of your work experience, like I said, it doesn't matter where you worked. List them, list your jobs, the company, the specific job description or title, the specific job title, and the year where the time frame where you worked in that position. You start with the most recent and go backwards. For each job, give the title, the company, the address, the dates of employment. Some potential employers are going to call those job sites and make sure that you actually work there, and they may just outright ask about you as an employee, whether or not you listed someone from that work site as a reference. You may be checked out in that way. I actually had about 3 years ago in this class, I used to have a resume assignment. I had a student who, and this did not go well for him, he actually had AI construct a resume for him, and most of the work experience that he listed, he never worked for those companies. And he thought it just really wouldn't matter. And I had to have a real conversation with him about the fact that these are going to be fact-checked. And if he's found to have lied, that's the kind of information, especially if you're working if you're trying to find employment in an industry where people talk to each other, that's the kind of thing that can get around. You do not want that. Include any kind of relevant employment experiences. It can be part-time jobs, internships, co-ops. If you've done side hustles, self-employment kind of things, you can include those as well. Now, not that you can see this particularly well on your screen, this is mostly a reminder that you should look at the example that's provided for you in your book, and build if you don't have a resume yet, you can start with this very simple organization and start building it. You can tweak it and make it fancier if you want. I have had students use Canva to build resumes. I have a very mixed opinion about that. While they look pretty, they are often devoid of information, and the organization of them can be clunky and hard to follow. Remember, many workplaces now, they're basically having a machine go through and figure out what's on your resume. If you're using a pretty but pictorial kind of layout, your resume may not get picked up as a result. So while those systems like Canva allows you to just sort of plug in your information and have a one-page, almost like a flyer that looks very attractive, it may not give you the space to include the type of information that potential employers are actually going to require that you provide for them. So keep that in mind before you jump on Canva to build your sexy resume. Make sure that you have room on that template to provide all of the kinds of information that are listed here. Some tips for you. Try to keep your resume at about a page. Now, as your career life goes on, you will likely not be able to have a one-page resume. What some people will do is they'll have their initial one-page resume, and they may include a note at the bottom saying, this is an abbreviated resume. If you would like the full resume, you can contact me, or it's available upon request. There's some controversy about whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. But, and some job ads actually say 1-page resume. Don't give me anything more than that. What they're wanting you to do is to really highlight the best information that you have about you. Carefully proofread your resume. Again, spelling, grammar, punctuation matters, as does the consistency of your using fonts. And this is another problem that you can get into using tools like Canva. The graphic designers at Canva love to change fonts for every different area of the resume. Some experts in this area say that doing that is distracting to the resume reader, and it tends to suggest that you're more interested in flourish than actual information. So some people really don't like that. Others think it shows your creativity and your individuality. But be careful about using consistent fonts and consistent formatting behaviors. Like, use the same type of bullet point when you're going to use bullet points. Don't vary them. Don't use a box for a bullet point here and a circle for a bullet point there. That kind of consistency can show that you have a high degree of attention to detail. It's always a good idea to convert your resume to a PDF. Unless the potential employer specifically requests it, submitting a PDF labeled with your first and last name. Don't leave a weird, long, non-descriptive file name for your resume. It should be your first name, your last name, the date, so that it can be filed accurately at the potential employer's workplace. Look for errors of formatting. Make sure that when you convert, say, a Word file to a PDF file, that there aren't any changes in the formatting that will look awkward. Occasionally, especially if you're moving from, say, Google Docs to PDF, some weird things can happen with formatting that can cause your resume to look odd. So make sure that you're careful about that. If you're submitting a hard copy, like sending it through the U.S. mail, which is becoming a rarity for a lot of us, make sure that you use a high quality printer so that you are submitting a solid professional copy. The last thing you want to do is to send in a resume where the ink is running out and the paper looks very cheap and unprofessional. You can also create a plain text copy of your resume that you can use to do some cutting and pasting if you're asked to submit your resume in that form. Some workplaces, when they put their applications out, or they put their requests for applicants out, they'll actually have a long online form where you're submitting the little elements of your resume into those text boxes. So you can copy and paste from your resume file into those little boxes. And, it's still recommended that you submit a copy as an attachment of the full resume, but a lot of them are going to want it to come in that format. The cover letter is really, really important. It can be hard to write, but your authors give you some guidelines, just like they do with the resume. There's a whole checklist for building your resume. There's also a checklist for building your cover letter presented to you in your text. The purpose of the cover letter is, first, to introduce who you are, using professional language to do that, and to highlight aspects of your resume. This is your chance to introduce yourself, to show why you're a good fit for the position you're applying for, and you're trying to persuade your prospective employer to bring you in for an interview. A good cover letter is going to be pretty short. very efficient with your language. It's going to explain what you can offer to an employer for the position that's being offered. The key thing that you want to focus your attention on is what can you do for them based on your experiences and education. It should be about 3 paragraphs long. It shouldn't be 6. Nobody has time to read that. It shouldn't be 1 paragraph. That shows you haven't really given enough thought to the position. So shoot for about 3 paragraphs. What should these paragraphs include? First, show that you're genuinely interested in the position, and that you know what the position is and what it entails. Explain why you're applying for the position, why you're excited about it, how it fits with your the type of work you're interested in doing, and the experiences you've had in the past. Second, show what your skills and experience are with a fair amount of specificity. Remember, you only have 3 paragraphs, so you want to highlight the most important aspects of your experience that are relevant to the position. In some cases, you're not going to have a lot of experience to share. But for some of you, if you really think about it, I try to tell students the work that you have done in class, doing research projects, investigating, building technical skills, all of that stuff, even if you don't have job experience in your back pocket, all of those skills that you've built through your education matter. So highlight the most important aspects of that background as you build that paragraph. Third is sort of a concluding paragraph. Restate that you're interested and qualified, and provide your contact information, meaning your phone number and your email address, and be sure to say thank you, and provide a signature of your full name. Generally speaking, don't sign with the way you would sign like a greeting card. You shouldn't sign with just your first name. It should be your first and last name that you provide for potential employers. That concludes part 1 of Chapter 13.